So what I'm saying is, like, when Israel was in a position where they're fighting a much bigger force, which was the English, to get them out, to kick them out of their land, they resorted to means and ways that today are looked at as subpar or terroristic. You know, when you look at the way that you know, the Hamas or Hezbollah, the way that they approach these things, is when you don't have the means to wage traditional war, how else are you able to defend yourself or get your point across when conversation is no longer a means? Being the most dangerous commentary show on Beyonce's internet comes with its own set of challenges. YouTube time and time again refuses to promote our videos because we have very controversial takes on extremely sensitive subjects. So chances are, if you stumbled on this clip by accident, you'll never get to see our content again unless you hit that subscribe button. It only takes 1 second. But either way, we're glad you're here. And now, back to the clip. So let's talk about, actually, yes, the statehood of Palestine, right? So right now, you have two different factions, right? You have Fatah running the West Bank, and you have Hamas running the Gaza Strip, right? Or whatever is left of it now, right? Now, here's the thing, right? So that's why I wanted to kind of like talk about the idea of like the concept of terrorism. The blockade of Gaza really intensified when Hamas was elected to run the Gaza Strip, right? Yep. Now, my question for you is, because if I look at it this way, and this is what I despise the most about this whole situation, is the fact that what Hamas did last weekend, you can't tell me they did that for the liberation of Palestine. No fucking way. Like, you're not going to tell, because you knew what was going to happen. You knew that the moment you guys crossed that line, the entire land was going to get pulverized, and a lot of people were going to get lost. From what I see, I think Hamas's main problem is the fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia were kind of slowly getting into bed, which they want to create this kind of corridor from India through Saudi Arabia and into Israel and into Europe, where they can move goods, which cuts out Iran, obviously, right? So now, you know, you have also Hamas having a problem with that, because the moment now Israel and Saudi Arabia make some sort of understanding of peace treaty, now, if you involve Israel into a war, because of that treaty, now you're also involving Saudi Arabia. They don't want that. So obviously, you know, none of it has to do with the liberation of Palestine. What they wanted to do was create a ruckus. Israel is going to come in, you know what I mean, just burn everything to the ground. And now that makes it impossible for Saudi Arabia to align itself with what is seen in the Arab world as a murderous Israel. Right? Now, I don't think the 2 million people on the Gaza Strip are all doing those kind of geopolitical calculations, right? Some of these people, they just want peace, they just want to raise their kids, but they're stuck into this cage, pretty much, right? Where you can't leave, right? They're telling you, okay, you know, we're gonna bomb this building. You got 10 minutes to get out, but go where? There is nowhere to go if everything is getting pulverized. So my question for you is, why would the people of the Gaza Strip choose the leadership of a Hamas, right? Well knowing that these people don't have their best interests at heart, right? But still decide to put these people in power in order to, like, for what reason would they choose something like that? The funny thing is, I mean, Hamas wasn't as bloodthirsty and murderous as it is today. Funny enough, it was just a political party. I mean, they were just slightly a little bit more liberal in the early 2000s as a political party. So for them to kind of foresee the death and destruction that Hamas has led them into, I mean, you know, when you have a leadership, right, where once it's been elected into power, there is no defying it in any way, shape, or form, meaning that you can't elect it out. Can't speak out against it. I mean, back in I think it was in 2018 that they had a protest and Hamas just started shooting at its own people. You literally have like a police state. I mean, essentially speaking, with radicalism. You know, the people are stuck. I mean, they're stuck. Not only are they stuck geographically speaking, but they're also stuck politically in a lot of different ways. You know, a good amount. The population of Gaza increased from like
something like 1 point something million to about like 2 million. And so a lot of those people that are there are under the age of 25.
Yeah,
right? So
I think something like what, like 50% is under 20 or something like that.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
So when they, for those kids growing up, they didn't know anything else, right? They grew up with Hamas,
and that's
this
what
was kind of became the status quo,
right.
They didn't even know anything else even existed, and they were taught growing up to hate Israel, to hate the Jews, that all the problems come from Israel. And by the way, we can critique Israel. Israel's far, or she's not immune from criticism of any kind. The problem that I'm seeing is that too much of that blame and criticism is put only on Israel a lot of the times. It's only now we're starting to see the problems of Hamas.
Right.
It's kind of sad that it had to go to get to this point, when blood had to spill the way that it did on Saturday.
And that brings me to like, so when we talk about terrorism, right? As I mentioned, like, the moment you start thinking that, hey, the murder of innocent people is something that is permissible, I have a big issue with that, right? But when you have a group of people who are, again, in this open air prison, there is no form of armaments coming in, and they have to rely on almost subpar ways to be able to fight, because Hamas doesn't have, because you hear people like the main argument you hear, like, Israel, if Israel wanted to wipe Palestine off the map, they would do it tomorrow, which is true, but from
theory,
no, even in theory, just like in reality they could do it, but it's not politically advantageous to do that, right?
And it's not moral either, man.
It's not moral or politically advantageous to be able to do that, right? So, but here's the thing: if you look, like, for example, I don't know if have you ever heard of the Deir Yassin massacre? So let's look at our screen there. So this is it took place in April 9th, 1948, when around 130 fighters from the Zionist paramilitary group Oregon and Lehigh killed at least 107 Palestinian Arab villages, including women and children in Deir Yassin. A village of roughly 600 people near Jerusalem, despite having earlier agreed to a peace pact.
Right.
The massacre occurred while Jewish militia sought to relieve the blockade of Jerusalem during the Civil War that preceded the end of the British rule in Palestine. So you can see that, like, when the kind of like the Jewish or Zionist armies, whatever you want to call it, when they didn't have the means and ways to be able to wage traditional war, they resorted to the same exact kind of tactics that you see the Palestinians resorting to today. Right? And a lot of this stuff was also kind of like on the hush-hush. Nobody really ever talks about it. Like, for example, somebody like you who is very knowledgeable about the fact seems surprised that we're talking about this. So, right? So look at this. So,
I remember.
Right? So the village put up stiffer resistance than the Jewish militias had expected, and it suffered casualties, but it fell after hours of house-to-house fighting. Literally, what happened here? Some of the Palestinian Arab villagers were killed in the course of the battle, while others were massacred by the Jewish militias while trying to flee or surrender. A number of Palestinian Arab prisoners were executed, some after being paraded in West Jerusalem, where they were jeered, spat at, stoned, looted, and eventually murdered. In addition to the killing and widespread looting, there may have been cases of mutilation and rape. Literally the same exact thing that we're seeing right now, right? But it goes to show you that when a small group of people does not have the means and ways to wage traditional war, they resort to these kind of tactics. And it's not just a one-sided thing. Right?
So first and foremost, I will say this. During the War of Independence at that time, you had small little paramilitia groups, right? So the IDF wasn't unified as the way that it is today. You had the Haganah, and then you had other different little factions.
Oregon,
Oregon and whatnot. So unfortunately, did some atrocities happen during that war? Absolutely, it did. And it's a very, very sad thing that something like that absolutely happened. Because even at that time, people say, well, there were 700,000 people that left or that were displaced. They're always thinking, well, it was always, in the event of something like this, which is not true, because a lot of this is my a lot of them actually left because you're caught in a war zone, right? So when you're caught in a war zone, naturally speaking, you're like, I gotta get swear on this, right?
Yeah, you can. I
gotta get the fuck out of the way.
We're deep down into the show now, so YouTube does not mind swearing, at least as long as it's not within the first 10 minutes of the show.
We gotta get the fuck out of the way. But also, the Arab leaders were actually calling on all I say Palestinians like this, not to be disrespectful or anything, but at that time they were not referred to as Palestinians. They were the Arabs, because they were one big Arab league. It was an Arab body at that time. They were telling all the Arabs that for them to evacuate and leave, clear out the area, so that way our armies can come in and we can wipe out all the Zionists. That's where a lot of the displacement happened. Now, with something like this, yes, I mean it is an atrocity. It is absolutely horrible. But then again, Ben Gurion, when he became prime minister,
he kind of wrote out that plan though. He
also cleaned house with the IDF. There was people that he killed within the IDF that he executed that were just not unified in terms of
but just to kind of stick to the point we're talking about, like, do you see how, like, you know, because the one thing that, you know, pro-Israel defenders in the mainstream media state is the fact that somehow the fact that Israel can, you know, use their air force and all this type, quote unquote, wage what's called traditional war, right? But do you see, the point I'm trying to make is, when Israel was not capable or had the means to wage traditional war, it resorted to terrorism as well. Right? Like, if you look at that, like, literally the same exact
King
thing
David
in, like,
Hotel, by the way, you know the King David Hotel?
Yeah.
So before 1947, the terrorists were the Jews. We were the ones that were bombing the hotels. We were the ones that, we were the ones that were but ultimately it was to get the British out of there. It wasn't even against the Arabs.
But that's what I'm saying. Why? Because the British were a much more powerful force.
We saw them as the colonial force.
Exactly. Right.
So we saw that as decolonization.
Right.
Get out of our land.
Right. But is this so? Just to go back, just to circle back, is when you look at the means. Listen, again, I am in no way justifying the killing or agreeing. But, like, what I'm trying to show is the smaller guy, like maybe to use it as an analogy, is it's like looking at David versus Goliath, and looking at David and being like, I can't believe he's using a slingshot. Right? He's a smaller guy. He can't go toe to toe on the sword fight with Goliath. But that's why he has to kind of take his distance and toss that rock, right? Slingshots back then, you know, were used to that was a sheep farmer type of tactic. You know what I mean? That was not an honorable. So what I'm saying is, like, when Israel was in a position where they're fighting a much bigger force, which was the English, to kick them out of their land, they resorted to means and ways that today are looked at as subpar or terroristic, right? So when you look at when you look at the way that the Hamas or Hezbollah, the way that they approach these things, is when you don't have the means to wage traditional war, how else are you able to defend yourself or get your point across when